Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the CxC video series. Where this week I was able to check out a movie all about time travel, codependent relationships, and saving the world. But enough about Bill and Ted saves and their latest movie. Let's talk about Tenet, because that one is a little more relevant, and I'm probably not the only one who saw it. In fact, I know I'm not the only one that didn't see it. I also have Chris Kline here, so let me introduce the Nightwing to my Red Hood, Chris Kline.
What a humble guy. What a humble dude that we both get to be Batman sidekicks together in a movie, watching a movie with the new Batman. Wow, that's what.
Yeah.
All teed up.
I couldn't say one of us is Batman because neither of us have the family trauma to be Batman.
That's true. Thank God for our parents. That is much true. Yeah, yes. we don't have the classic superhero start there.
Yes, and I gave you the sidekick that lives. So we'll say that.
Well, you come back though, unless it's a spoiler for Hush and a bunch of other times that Jason Todd comes back. But
right,
I feel like a lot of Batman fans say Jason Todd's the best Robin too. I've always been partial to Dick Grayson as the classic, so I'm totally okay with this arrangement if you are.
Yeah, I'm good with it. And speaking of the new Batman, Robert Pattinson is in Tenet, and along with John David Washington, who some people know is from BlacKkKlansman and a couple other deals, and quite a few other hosts of people. But let's just say those two. And we're going to try to save everybody from spoilers a little bit. So let me kind of tee up the movie. The movie, according to IMDb, is about armed with only one word, Tenet, and fighting for survival of the entire world, a protagonist's journey through the twilight world of international espionage, unfolding in something beyond real time. Which, if that did not confuse you, then, oh boy, you're in for a ride for this movie.
You're back, baby.
So, yeah, we're back into the theaters.
We were prepping for this. I love how you said it's James Bond meets Doctor Who.
It is.
I think that's helpful. If you're familiar with either of those franchises, I mean, as you know, you and I are both huge Bond fans. You know way more about Doctor Who than I do, but I understand enough about it to know it's like James Bond with some time travel elements, and you're pretty good to go there.
Yep, that's what you got to know. It's a Christopher Nolan flick, so it looks cool. Yep, it looks sweet. The visuals are great. Probably see it on the biggest screen as possible if you can. Just like his many other films, it is good. So, Chris, what? Just general. Let's take a first few minutes here and just kind of think. What are your thoughts on the movies? Like I said, we're trying to stay away from kind of the bigger things. Let's say the end third a little bit, but kind of what are your thoughts on the Tenet, or if we say it backwards, Tenet?
Tenet, yeah. I mean, I've thoroughly enjoyed it, partially because, as you know, I had wonderful company to watch the movie with, and that made it a blast to see it together. And at the same time, it's really tough to talk about without the spoilers because this movie is so dependent on, for me, the last probably sixth, you could say last third, but really the climax of the movie is stupendous, is fantastic. And I thought the movie overall is very good. It's really twisty-turny. I love the spy thriller element of it. A lot of charming performances. I mean, I thought John David Washington was fantastic playing this CIA operative who, is both charming at times and an action star at times, and kind of solving a mystery at other parts in time. Robert Pattinson is amazing. I mean, this is not a spoiler to say, but he always comes off as someone who knows a little bit more than he should. He does things that make you trust him, but he says things that indicate that there's some deeper thing there that makes you think he might not be trustworthy. And so they play with that really in interesting ways. I thought Elizabeth Debicki's performance as Kate was really good. I mean, she plays this kind of mom who's trying to get out of a rough situation. Kenneth Branagh is a fantastic villain, kind of the classic James Bond Russian evil villain. That was really good. And I think overall, I mean, it starts off, it throws you right into the middle of it. You don't know what's necessarily going on. And the middle of the movie it adds more to that and doesn't always clear it up, but then a good payoff at the end. So overall, that was one of my biggest issues with it, is that it seemed like the beginning didn't give you quite enough to work with. In the middle, maybe added parts without resolving some things in the beginning, but then the end has a great payoff. So again, without saying any spoilers, that was how I felt the movie it went from being, oh, this is a good Christopher Nolan movie, I enjoy it, Nolan's my favorite director, so I'm like, yeah, this is good. Whereas the end, I'm like, okay, I really appreciate this. This really was well earned.
Yeah. And so, in my opinion, this is the most Christopher Nolan movie ever. It is Christopher Nolan through and through.
For better or worse.
For better or for worse. And you can see there's a lot of Christopher Nolan-isms here. And just like Dunkirk and a couple other movies that he's done, in my opinion, you kind of have to sit through a lot of things to get to the end.
Right.
And a lot of Christopher Nolan's movies are based on the reveal or the show at the end, or the prestige,
right? Yeah,
prestige, as it were, at the end of the film. And some of them pay off better than others. And I would say this is probably one of the best payoffs of any of his movies, which makes sitting through sometimes a little bit of a plotting middle worth it in the end. And for sure, that sense that it may be a little bit plotting middle might change on second viewings, because this movie definitely prompts itself to do multiple watches of it. There's just no way around it, really.
To see what clues you pick up on as they kind of reveal throughout. I mean, it's I think the fun of it is it's a movie that doesn't give you anything. You've got to engage with the movie. You've got to pay attention. I mean, even things like that, Nolan runs the score so loudly that it's difficult sometimes to understand what the characters are saying. They deliver key dispositive pieces of dialogue really quickly with loud music in the background. I think it's to encourage us to basically be plugged into the movie. And it's not just going to be a A to B, B to C type movie. It's going to be a movie where you really have to wonder, now, why are we doing this? Who's going to what again? What's their relationship with each other? Who's on whose side? I think all those things get played with the movie. It makes it for a more fun experience. I think repeat viewing, it'd be nice to, now that you know where it's going, to watch and pick up on things you didn't pick up on before.
Yeah, I think for sure. And that, so kind of a little bit of not knowing, we get dropped into this movie, almost not literally, but pretty close of just getting right into something. Kind of brings up my point when we talk about what our kind of goal of this kind of video series we're doing. If we haven't said it yet, CxC kind of stands for where Christianity meets crisis culture. And so part of where my angle at this is coming from is, just like the protagonist, we never know his first name. He's our surrogate for this film.
Right.
And he gets dropped in, and like any good science fiction film, there are rules to this world. And there are rules and things that we have to understand. And when you throw in not just sci-fi, but time travel, depending on your version of time travel, it's the Back to the Future or the Star Trek mode. There are even more things you have to put on top of that. And so there's so much in the end of this is, boy, sometimes you just got to understand you don't know what you don't know. And you have to be kind of okay with that. And for me, that's a lot of my faith, right? I think when we're young and we're growing up, we hear stories. The children's Bible that we get have cut and dry stories. Pretty much there's not a whole lot of layers to some of the things that we hear about.
Right.
But as we get older and we progress more in our faith, a lot more complexity gets thrown in. And part of the issue is, at some point in times, we can either drive ourselves batty in our faith, trying to figure out predestination, or when the millennial, are we post, wherever we are on that, and the Apocrypha, do we follow Left Behind? We've not, who knows? There's reason why in 2,000 years of our faith, these things haven't been answered, right? Scholars have been studying it for 2,000 years. Who knows? So there are some times where we just have to sit back and go, I don't know what I don't know, but this is what I can do in my faith. Which is, I think, we're the protagonist, and we call him the protagonist because literally that's what is he called. He doesn't have a name.
So in the end credits, it just says John David Washington, protagonist.
Yeah. So if that's driving you crazy watching this video, going, why don't they say his name? Well, he doesn't have one. So we will probably call him the protagonist. Sometimes we have to be like that. It's it's kind of Christian and Pilgrim's Progress the same way, where sometimes we just have to go on and kind of realize we don't understand. Go with the flow and kind of just a little bit along for the ride and care about the major things and maybe not so much the minor.
No, I love that. It's similar to my take. It's kind of understanding your role and how we fit into God's plan and scripture as well. I mean, I think what's the right way to kind of explain my take? Because it's not the easiest take to explain, not the easiest movie to kind of dialogue about, especially without doing spoilers or anything.
Yeah.
I think one of the things in the movie is it involves people traveling backwards and forwards through time. And so again, if you've seen the trailer, you know that part of it. And so like we're talking with our review of the movie, the ending is wonderful because it ties things together, but you don't really get to see that. But upon a repeat viewing, you would see it better. And it makes me think of kind of how we analyze the Bible and the roles of certain books in the Bible. And in particular, made me think of Revelation. There's a sermon series we did at Wooddale called Long Story Short. And the church, when I lived in Washington, D.C., the church I went to out there did Long Story Short for 13 weeks. So it's a really deep dive. And one of the themes of that whole series is that to really understand Scripture, you need to analyze and to understand Christianity out of Scripture, to understand faith and everything that God's trying to teach us. You often have to look beyond just the story that you're looking at in the moment, or just the book. You have to be able to look and contextualize. You have to draw on things in the Old Testament to interpret the New. You have to draw on references in the Old Testament, the New Testament, New and Real. And I think this movie has elements of that for sure, where you can appreciate certain parts of it more by once you understand the whole picture, not just watching it in the moment. One of the good takeaways from that sermon series I remember was when we talked about Revelation. And our pastor there, Mark Batterson, talked about the idea of adjacent possible. And adjacent possible is this idea that we can only understand the future. We understand the future better as we progress towards it. And Revelation is trying to convey the end times. And it seems really confusing and super trippy. And yet, throughout history, as believers, we've actually gradually got to understand it better. There's parts of Revelation that we debate, like you brought up with Left Behind books. Like, is there a rapture? Or if there is a rapture, does it happen during the tribulation period? Is the tribulation period 7 years? What does the number 7 mean? By the way, there's this giant beast. Where does he fit in? It just gets weirder and weirder from there, right? Where we're trying to figure that all out. And yet, there's certain parts of Revelation, like the existence of Israel as a state. If you told somebody in the year 1000 that Israel would be a state, they'd say that's impossible. Why would Israel's not going to come back? It's uncontrolled by foreign powers. The Jews are scattered throughout the world at that point after the diaspora. Like, there's not going to be a recreation of the Israelite state. And yet, 1947, Israel comes into existence. That's been seen as like a fulfilling of Revelation that would seem unbelievable. There's other parts of Revelation that talk about like simultaneous communication around the world. Tell someone like that in the Roman Empire, hey, imagine the entire world hearing something. They'd imagine like a booming voice from heaven, but that'd be pretty difficult to contextualize. Well, you and I could think about the idea of a simultaneous broadcast. I mean, how many millions of people tuned into the conventions last week?
Yeah.
The week before, it's like we're not that far away from thinking about how there could be a way that everyone on the planet could hear the same thing at once. So we understand it better as we progress towards it. And I think it's the same thing with this movie, where it's like, now that we look back on it, you could go back and understand why certain things were happening that weren't clear in the moment. And to tie it in with yours in a lot of way, the main character, the protagonist, and some of the other characters, they have clear roles to play. And they play their roles even though they don't understand the extent of the roles or the whole story until the end. But they still know they're advancing towards something. They're either trying to start or stop. I mean, the bad guy's trying to destroy the world. Like I said, it's a James Bond movie, so you could track-ish, sort of James Bond movie-ish, so you get it. They still play that role. And just like how, hey, we understand from Revelation that God's got this, and there is a plan, but we don't understand exactly how it's going to go down. We're getting a better understanding, but we don't understand. We do understand our role is to honor God in our actions, to love and serve Him however we can. And, we know enough. Just like how the characters knew enough to fulfill their roles throughout, even though they didn't see the whole picture until the end, until the prestige, until the deal.
Yeah, and there's this thing that they keep on talking about in the film, and it is ignorance a little bit, is where some people are ignorant about things going on, and sometimes you have to act ignorant, and that's just ignorance in this case is just a lack of knowledge of things, kind of in our faith, and I guess for us it's a little bit tough. I mean, there's the movie world, which is great, but you go movie world when now we're in reality. Yeah. Well, it's kind of tough to sometimes remember that we believe in a God who lives outside of time a bit, where as we see things always progressing forward, and this is why this movie is sometimes so hard to watch, is because for us, realizing what would be like to progress backwards in time, or not how we know time conventionally. Well, God is a God who knows all and has power over all, from the beginning, from the end, Alpha, the Omega, and He's outside or over it in a bit of a way.
Right.
So in a way, we have to trust in a God that sees the entire story, who wrote the script of the movie, but only gives you this little slice of it right now.
Right.
And only reveals it to you in this way, where his story sometimes understands of, well, you think your main point is going to be here. Well, really, there's a lot of things right here and here that were more important to you. You just don't know that yet.
Right.
And I think that was just a real fascinating thing about this movie, is this kind of understanding of time. Christopher Nolan, this isn't the first time he's played with time, for sure. Both Memento has a forward backward time, and also Dunkirk is
three
is a
stories
bit of
that tie together at the end, right? I mean, different.
It's a bit of a time warp.
Yeah.
So he is
Inception with the dreams and how time progresses in each layer. That there's time elements. I mean, I read in Interstellar how they age in different ways. There's Nolan, I think, is fascinated by the intersection of the metaphysical and the physical. I think he views time as like the one unifying thing, like love and kind of the softer metaphysical things all interact in the same world as physical reality, as physics does. I'm nowhere near understanding any. I'm not a philosophy guy to that level, and I certainly don't understand physics in the slightest. But there's at least a cool. I think he views time as a lens to understand and interpret that. That's in each of his movies.
Yeah, and so then I mean, for sure, he uses that as a lens. But what the hard part for us, and maybe you can chime in, maybe you want to talk about this too, is what do we do as we sit in the timeline we're sitting in?
Right.
Sometimes there's frustration in it because we don't have the God view or the scriptwriter view, depending on what you want to, whatever side of the analogy of the X of the CxC that we want to we're on right now. But I mean, when we sit where we are, there is frustration sometimes about our futures, but we also have frustrations about our past at the same times. Now, on the flip side, we also can be very hopeful about the future, and we can be also very hopeful and thankful and appreciative about our past. That's the easy part, and that's where I think everybody wants to be, is on that hopeful side.
Yeah.
But sometimes, especially the reason why we're doing this via StreamYard, doing video contact, is because we're not really supposed to be meeting in person because it's a tough time right now. Right. So how do we look at this in the timeline of our lives as something positive? How do we look at this as a God blessed situation we're in right now?
Right.
So that's kind of my bigger question on this, about when we talk about not being able to see the time the way God has laid it out for us, just the whatever 80 to 100 years we have here, hopefully.
Right. I mean, I still think it comes back to knowing your role. If you go back to the lens of the movie, there's the villain, Kenneth Branagh's character, and there's a line where he literally talks about how he believes he's a god. And part of it is because, again, maybe the slightest spoiler here, but I think this is a necessary part of the discussion to reveal, he has the ability to sort of, he's kind of communicating with the future and receiving things from the future. So he's kind of in a unique position there where he has a greater knowledge than other people and a greater impact on the future and the past and the present all together because of his role as the villain. And he talks about how that makes him kind of a god. He's also kind of a madman, and it shows that he knows more than someone is meant to, and intends to do evil things with it in a way that would be detrimental to literally everyone, including himself. Yeah. And whereas if you look at the other characters who approach that in the movie, because there's, I think, without spoiling, there's, I'd say, probably 2 or 3 other characters who get close to being at that person's position, where they have a pretty clear understanding of the past, present, future, and how they all fit together in the movie. And they still focus on their role, whether that is making a tremendous personal or sacrifice of another, whether that is undertaking a very daunting challenge, whether that is kind of surrendering themselves to the greater cause that they're all trying to serve, of stopping this guy's evil plan. I think that's kind of what God wants us to do, is recognize, like, he's the one who sees things in a way that we don't. He's the Christopher Nolan of this movie. Or in our case, whenever you and I watch the movie together again, we're in that position of seeing the bigger story. Yeah. But the protagonists, the heroes of this movie, they still play their role. There's a part of the movie early on where the scientist is trying to explain something. A scientist character is trying to explain some things to the protagonist. And the protagonist is like, I'm not sure I'm tracking with all this. And she's like, well, don't think about it, just feel it, because I need you to be present in the moment. She didn't say that. She just feel it, implying that you need to be present in the moment. Yeah. I think that's the key, to listen to God and to try to figure out, well, clearly this is happening for some reason. and to listen and be, intuitive. I mean, to try to figure out what am I being asked to do in this moment? What am I supposed to make out of this?
Yeah. Yeah. And for sure. And it's interesting because that part of that movie is, I mean, it's kind of in the trailers. So it's when he's trying to actually control this kind of inversion part for the first time. And it's also, I mean, that's kind of, like I said, we don't control as young kids, as early Christians, we don't really control much about our faith in a way, right? Especially when we're little. If you like you and I, we grew up in the faith. We don't have anybody on here that has later kind of found God, but either way, there are you're kind of handheld through a lot of things at the beginning and kind of given it, right?
Very true.
And it's the frustration of when you first kind of have to take control of your faith, right? If that was for a lot of people, that's in college or the first time you're away from your folks, or, sometimes there's a big life event where you all of a sudden have to realize, oh, I got to understand my own faith.
Right.
You have to, and you try to take control. And that's when Barbara, I'm kind of cheating with names.
I knew it was Barbara or Laura, but I couldn't figure out which one it was.
Right.
So I'm scientist.
It's when the Barbara tells the protagonist, you just kind of have to
Fleur Delacour from Harry Potter, because you said you watched those. That's Fleur.
Yeah. You just kind of got to hold on. You got to let it go. Yeah. You just got to feel it. But that's a tough thing in our lives, right?
Absolutely.
Sometimes is just letting it go and feeling it, because at least for me in my life, I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. And so letting it go and just letting it the feel and giving kind of control. I never want to come off as the bad Christian or a bad person in general, right? So I don't know sometimes what is good and best. And I don't know if you can help me with that, is saying with ideas of, well, this is how we make sure we kind of let it go, but we let it go in a way that we can, in the movie parlance, control time, but control what we're doing and making sure we're acting like Christians that we should. I say that as a question. That should be really a nonsense, but
no, I mean, so you're saying the challenge of being present to honor God without kind of giving into the temptation of either thinking of the future, whether it's excessive worry or whether it is kind of pining for the future, or conversely, not dwelling on the past either. Kind of being obsessed. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not going to get the words in this one right, but I know that when you're struggling with things in the past, I think if you're dwelling on things that are issues in the past, to recognize that those are pretty much almost always lies from the devil. Christ died for our sins. Whatever bad things have occurred in the past, we are forgiven of any mistakes we have made. And we know that there is a future where there will be no more pain, there will be no more suffering once we pass away. So I think always bringing the kind of, when you have those negative thoughts, capturing them, labeling them as such is just not a necessary thing for a Christian. And then recognizing that obviously you have to process emotion, but there's no sense, if you've taken your action steps to do whatever you can on this earth to make that issue kind of go away, you're still responsible for things if you've made a mistake. To recognize that we're not called to be obsessed over guilt. We're called to rectify past wrongs for sure, but we're not called to dwell on those or have them defeat us over and over again. And in terms of the future, I think that's my biggest struggle. I am sometimes too much of a pain avoider. I am far too often do not want to focus on the pain of the moment. I want to focus on the joys of the future to come. Yeah. And so for me, it's only the last couple of years I really realized, oh my gosh, that's a struggle for me. I think a lot of people don't realize that that's even a challenge. So that's where I usually come at it. And so for me, it's recognizing that, I've learned that, work and play, both, I get to honor God in both those things. You and I recently, did that radical mentoring program through church. And what big thing that how this helps me with struggling with the future is thinking about my purpose. We did an exercise where we thought about what's our purpose and why we do what we do.
Yeah.
And for me, my conclusion is my purpose is to uplift others with the joy I know through Christ. And so sometimes that's easy. Sometimes I get to go see a movie with a really good friend and talk about it over a fun video and break down. It's easy to uplift. It's like, hey, I wanted to talk about this movie. It's fun. It's exciting. It'll come naturally. Yeah. But sometimes when it's been a really long, tough work week, it's tough I have to orient myself and think, well, how am I going to uplift my clients at work? What's the right thing I can do here? And recognize that even if it isn't as exciting in the moment to do, a task that we don't enjoy at work, it's like I connect it to my purpose of saying, well, I'm going to uplift them by doing a great job for them on this. And that's helped me to really recontextualize whatever I'm struggling with in the moment, where instead of focusing on a future fun, awesome thing, I can say, well, no, I'm in here for a reason because my purpose is constant.
Yeah.
My purpose requires me to work now. And I love my purpose. It's what God gave me. I relish it and savor it. So probably maybe too long of an answer, but that's at least my thoughts on it. What are yours?
Purpose and role is great. I think you're right on the back. When we look back in things and letting go, it's easier to let go because, Christ tells us we're new creations, and when we accept Christ into our hearts, is the term we like to use. When we become believers, we are shrouded new, and you're right. It was a great insight saying that doesn't mean we don't have to rectify in our past what's there. And that's not just, if you're a 12-step person asking for forgiveness, that is dealing with pain, that is dealing with disappointment and other things that have affected you in your past. And, there's different ways to deal with that. A lot of times, I come out of the belief of, whenever we deal with pain, it is best to do it with somebody else, and somebody who knows and is willing to take on the yoke with you of this burden and guide you through it. But so when we get there, then you're right, we got to deal with the future, and the future's hard because, like I said, God sees this outside view. We have this view from where we are in time. And it's such a weird Bible answer, but, looking into the scripture and knowing that God does have better plans for us. The plans to prosper you is an interesting verse because there's some question. We try not to get too deep into things here of if he's talking to the singular as a person or as Christian believers as a group when he's talking about that verse. But either way, we can take it as God does have a plan for us and a plan to prosper. Not prosper necessarily as prosperity, but for the good.
Yeah, and greater wealth than just finances and such.
Right. And that doesn't mean there's not going to be pain, which when we say that God has given us to prosper there and wants us to do things in the future and he has good, all the best for us, doesn't mean it's not going to be painful, and it's not going to be a road full of disappointment, because there is a part of it that we live on this side of heaven. And we live in a non-perfect world. And yes, you also quoted, on the other side, there is a new heaven, new earth, and new bodies for us is kind of in this deeper parts of the Bible that people don't realize and understand, but it's in there. And yes, so some of the things that we have here that we're struggling through will be fixed on the other side.
Yeah.
And it's just that frustration that we're in the middle right now. And
the long plotting middle of Tenet that has a wonderful payoff.
Yes. And it's
a wonderful middle too. It's a really fun movie throughout, but I know with a critical eye. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Critical eye, a lot of exposition in the middle, a lot of exposition, which I didn't go to film school, and I just know scriptwriters will say sometimes it's better to show instead of say. So, as a scriptwriter,
Nolan is really good at showing. He just doesn't always show. Sometimes he does say,
Yeah. And so, how does that we take that? Well, so sometimes in our lives, it's better to show instead of say, right? I know a lot of times in my life, something like you said, we joined that rattle mentoring group. Yeah. Well, doing something like that is not a showing, not a saying. That is a showing, because that was an action that we did. I mean, we were invited into the program, but we all had to say yes to it. And when we did it, it was a yes to a year-long commitment. And if we weren't willing to commit and do the work, there was homework, and I have not been in school for a long time. So knowing that I had homework for an entire year, it wasn't exactly a non, a meh thing. It was something to think about,
It was a significant commitment. Yeah,
it was
for
a
sure.
significant commitment. So that is that is doing the work, and sometimes that's what we have to do, and that's what they do that's what the protagonist does in the movie eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he has to know that he doesn't know what's going on, but he can't just be passive in the movie. Partly because then we don't have a movie, but he has to play this role, and he has to do it, and he has to do it the best way that he can, and he does it the way that he knows how to. He doesn't do it as somebody else. There's other characters, he could try to be like Neil, Robert Pattinson's character. He could be more like him, but he doesn't. He does it his way, and he makes sure he does that his own way in a few different times in the movie. And I think that's kind of what we have to do in our lives a little bit.
Really good point. I love that. Really good point.
Yeah. And, in life, we find people, and we joke about the Batman thing at the beginning and being the sidekicks, but Batman didn't alone. Christ didn't do it alone. He had a group of 12. If we were so fortunate to have 12 or 11 other believers or 12 other believers around us, that'd be great. And even when one fell, he replaced it, right? The 12 replaced themselves. So there is this community. And I think, like I said, with the past, that helps with the burden. But as you were saying, kind of what you were learning before is when you have people around you and it's not just yourself, you also get 12 different views of the future. And so for you, Chris, with our group of friends that we know and we did that group with, well, all of us, all 12 of us would have a different version of where you can go in your life. And we would be able to speak into your life. And I think we've done it. We have people now that are dads that weren't, and you're in a new place because you're
married during it, right?
You got married during it.
Right? Half married guys, half single guys. I split halfway through.
Yep. And so we were 12 guys that were willing and able to speak into your future. And we all saw the good in you, and we see the good in you. And that's the beauty of being in community. And so did this movie based around community? No, not really. And will my answer be in community with other people? Probably fall in a lot of other films and talk about things that we talk about. Yeah, probably. But when we talk about the unknown and uncertainties, which this movie is definitely about, not doing it alone is one of the best things, is finding a group around you.
Well, I think, okay, anyone, this is a generally significant spoiler, but I'll make it vague enough that if you're still listening and haven't seen it, but spoiler in the movie, the protagonist learns he needs a community around him too. And again, that's revealed over the course of the movie, and the extent of the team and who's in and out on that team and such is revealed. And again, I won't say more details, but I think that for a movie that doesn't seem to be about relationships, in fact, there are some really, again, that's why the ending is such a powerful payoff. It is about the need for a group to accomplish a mission together, and things that you thought maybe the protagonist was doing himself, you see the role that others played in, either that he was playing for them without them even knowing, or they were playing for him. Again, it's kind of trippy and difficult to explain without spoiling, but I think you see the importance that all these characters are more interconnected. Look what I'm saying.
Exactly.
More interconnected than you think.
The tenets about the movie is that they're maybe more interconnected than you think.
This is not necessarily a philosophical take, but a fun thing I looked at this morning with it. Tenet, apparently it's a particular square. It's the palindrome, right? And I wish I could remember the name of it, but I think it's a Stora square or Sorta square. But it's a particular square with a bunch of different words that, whether they're upper, vertical, horizontal, whatever way you read them, they're all the same. They find these throughout the Roman Empire. They found them while they've been excavating, and they think it actually might have been, if you rearrange them, they actually have a Christian message. So it's just kind of a fun fact. Supposedly this movie might have been named on a kind of a secret Christian article. It was a secret thing that Christians would do to kind of signify with each other that they weren't alone, that they were with community, because they'd make these markings, and the Romans would just see a bunch of random Latin phrases, but other Christians would know whoever made this marking is also a believer. So it's kind of a good message that, like we're saying here, that the movie itself is based on this idea of that reference, that type of I should remember what it was called, but that square, that Tenet, the Tenet square, that Christians would do to show each other, you're not alone. We're in this together. We're in community, even if it doesn't seem that way.
Yeah. And once again, we teed this up as like a Bond meets Doctor Who. Doctor Who is very well known for having companions and always having the Doctor, always having people around him. And James Bond it would not be James Bond without a team with M, Q,
Penny,
and well, we can say what about the Bond girls, which is something. Yeah,
that's another podcast.
That's a whole other deal and a whole other issue.
Leiter always comes to help from the CIA side, right?
Right. Yeah. Felix. Yes. No matter who he's being played by.
It is a good point that in each Bond movie, he does always have a team of people around him. Even though we think of Bond as the classic action star, the classic macho do-it-all himself, he always has to go see Quartermaster to get the weapons. He always needs M for the briefing. He always needs assistance, whether it's Moneypenny or whether it's one of the Bond girls or several of the Bond girls to play different. Whether it's Leiter whenever he's dealing with the CIA, he needs a team of people around him.
Yep, he's never alone. So yeah, that's great. And once again, for us. And for what we're doing here, this is really, we're teeing up a longer conversation. And part of finding community can be, taking what we're talking about here and going to another believer, or just anybody, that you maybe think is a believer, or, maybe a cool pastor that likes movies. I know they're out there, and say, hey, these guys are talking about something. Can we talk about it? We just want this to be a starter to a larger conversation, and just a way that we can start seeing culture and Christianity collide and where they meet, because we are in this world, we are in this time where as Christians, we have to deal with what's around us. There are many views on how we can do that. Our belief here is that we are Christians within society, within culture. We are not apart from it. So since we are in it, we must have to learn how it connects and crosses. So that's what I have. Chris, do you have anything else?
Well, I think we've covered it thoroughly. Let's move on to Mulan.
All right. Yes, that is what we're going to try to do next. I don't know how these are going to get released, but time-wise, we are going to try to get Mulan, which is the newer one that just came out in our world, in our time, because the beauty of technology, we also might send these out time-wise different. So that is what we might be looking forward to. We'd love to have a great discussion on that too. So, Chris, thank you so much for talking about this crazy movie. Go out and see it. Like I said, bigger screen the better, but also maybe with subtitles. Obviously, be safe. If you're comfortable, go wear your masks and stay 6 feet apart from others while you watch it. And I highly recommend seeing it as well. Yeah. And Francis, thank you so much for having me. It's so fun to talk. Like I said, we probably would do this anyway. We always talk about movies, so why not put it on the podcast format? Why not put it out? Yes. And obviously, the way we saw this movie, we were together, but man, was it a weird experience.
Oh my gosh.
I think when I got my tickets late on, there was 4 of us, and I think there were 5 seats. And we had seats in between. Very interesting. Yep. And it's a conversation that we can have, and we're around too. So thank you, and we will see you next time.
Sounds
Bye.
Good. Bye.